Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today we're looking at Raggadragga Goreguts boss. So Raggadragga is a Gruul commander. He's a 4-mana 4/4, and he says each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2. Whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it, and whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature, it gets +7/+7 and gains trample until end of turn. So basically, this makes it so that all of our mana dorks are now also beatdown creatures. So one path that we can take is we can play a bunch of our mana dorks and then use them to get Raggadragga out. Then we can attack with our at least usually 2 or 3 power mana dorks. And then when we attack with them, they untap. So we get to both beat down on our opponents while untapping those mana dorks to be able to cast spells in the second main phase. And also Raggadragga's third ability can be used in some combos involving casting 7 mana or greater spells. So of course, we're going to want as many ramp creatures as possible, with some other ramp thrown in, like of course the best things like Soul Ring and Mana Crypt, but primarily mana dorks. So Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, Boreal Druid, Delighted Halfling, Devoted Druid, Elvish Mystic, Fyndhorn Elves, Incubation Druid, Llanowar Elves, Priest of Titania, Sanctum Weaver, and Selvala are all mana dorks. Do note that certain of these cards are not mana dorks, so like Arbor Elf's ability technically is not a mana ability, so this will not get the pump. And of course, other cards that generate mana in other ways, like Dockside, Ragavan, and Professional Facebreaker are also not mana dorks. Same deal with Goblin and Narcomancer. But all of these cards are ramp to various degrees. And of course, some of these mana dorks that produce multiple mana per tap, or which just have the ability to do other things, are going to be combo pieces that can generate infinite mana. So Bloom Tender, Devoted Druid, Incubation Druid, Sanctum Weaver, Priest of Titania, and Selvala are all cards that can generate infinite mana in certain combinations, which we'll get to later. And of course, since we're going to be running a ton of mana dorks, Leyline of Abundance is going to be particularly good with them, and can itself also lead into infinite combos. So what are those combos? Well, first of all, we do have Aggravated Assault. Since Raggadragga untaps our mana dorks when they attack, if we have 5 mana worth of mana dorks that can also produce double red, we can attack with those creatures. They will untap from Raggadragga's trigger. Then we can tap those creatures for 5 using Aggravated Assault and take infinite combat steps and win the game. We also have Cloudstone Curio here. So Cloudstone Curio in combination with anything that grants haste to our mana dorks can potentially generate infinite mana. So let's say we've got Priest of Titania and enough elves that we can generate enough mana to cast Priest, bounce another creature back to our hand, then cast that creature, bounce Priest back to our hand, and then recast the Priest. Then we can generate infinite mana using Cloudstone Curio. So again, Cloudstone Curio plus haste effect, plus mana dorks that can generate enough mana to pay for everything, generates infinite mana. It also goes infinite with Dockside sometimes, or just other creatures. And this is going to work similarly with cards like Staff of Domination and Umbral Mantle that untap creatures. So if we've got any creatures that generate more mana than it costs to untap them, we can do so with Umbral Mantle and Staff of Domination. Temur Sabertooth bounces creatures back to our hand, so similar to Cloudstone Curio, it's basically just another way of having a creature version of Cloudstone Curio to bounce creatures and recast them. Then we've got all of those creatures that are going to be generating more mana, so things like Marwyn, Heronblade Elite, and Viridian Joiner are all creatures that generate mana based on their power, but we can also use cards like Priest of Titania, just any mana dorks that generate more mana than it costs to untap them. So we will need ways of making these creatures bigger, but of course Raggadragga already makes them at least +2 bigger. And this is another way that we can go infinite with Raggadragga. So if we've got a 7 mana spell or greater, Raggadragga's third ability untaps a creature and gives it +7. So let's say we have a 7 mana spell and we cast it. So Raggadragga will target Marwyn or Heronblade or Viridian Joiner or Selvala, any of those creatures, giving them +7, making them tap for a bajillion mana. And the third ability also untaps them. So if we have a way to continuously recast that spell, we can go infinite there. So this is where our expensive spells are going to come into play. So Spine of Ish Sah is a 7 mana artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, you destroy target permanent, and when it dies, you return it to your hand. So the thing about Spine of Ish Sah is that it can target itself. So if you've got a Marwyn, a Heronblade Elite, a Viridian Joiner, a Selvala, you can cast Spine of Ish Sah, use Raggadragga trigger from the spine being cast since it's 7 mana to target one of these guys, to untap it and give it +7. The Spine of Ish Sah will enter the battlefield, trigger, target itself, blow itself up, and then immediately return to your hand from its death trigger. You can then tap the Marwyn or whatever creature it is to generate a bunch of more mana, recast the Spine of Ish Sah, etc. Do that infinite amount of times to generate infinite mana, and also just make your creatures infinite by using Raggadragga, because then you can start untapping other creatures as well. Well, you always have to untap one of these guys, but if you have any other Mono Dorks, you can like untap them at a certain point. So you make at least one, if not multiple creatures infinitely big. This effect with Spine of Ish Sah will also work with cards that have buyback. So Worm Calling, if you can make the X at least 6, and then also pay the buyback cost. Now that is quite steep. It is very expensive to get this going in the first place, but once you do, you get to go infinite with it. Fanning the Flames also does the same thing, but Fanning the Flames specifically is red, which makes it a little bit more difficult because some of these cards only produce green mana, like Viridian Joiner and Marwyn, but some cards will also generate red mana, so you can also go infinite using Fanning the Flames in that regard. Fanning the Flames also just instantly kills all of your opponents because it's a direct damage dealer. Worm Calling makes infinite worms, which is also potentially good enough as well. We also just have straight up Kiki-Jiki plus Hyrax Tower Scout to untap things, to untap Kiki-Jiki and make infinite tokens. We are a deck that is based around creature combos, so these are going to be fairly easy to assemble. But Hyrax Tower Scout is also just good with other cards. So like Hyrax Tower Scout doesn't just combo with Kiki-Jiki. It can combo with like anything that's generating a bunch of mana plus Cloudstone, Temur Sabertooth, etc. Kiki-Jiki can also do similarly. And then we've got Tooth and Nail as a tutor that can like tutor up both of these guys directly into play, or just any other creature combination that will go infinite. So of course, a whole bunch of mana. Especially notable, Gaia's Cradle, of course, and Nykthos are going to allow us to do a bunch of big mana plays. Dryad Arbor is also here as a Green Sun Zenith target, and because it's a creature, you can use it in combination with Cloudstone Curio sometimes, or other types of those effects. Concordant Crossroads is here as a way to give all of our stuff haste, some fast mana, a little bit of protection from the red blasts. Then we've got a bunch of card draw. So because we're based around both getting a bunch of mana and powering up our creatures, we can have power-based draw spells or creature-based draw spells. So Toski and Oran Frostfang will allow us to draw whenever our creatures are hitting our opponents, which we want to do anyway with our Mana Dorks and Raggadragga. And then we've got a bunch of cards that draw equal to power, so Garruk, Last March of the Ants, Return of the Wild Speaker, Rishkar's Expertise, also just Sylvan Library to be a draw spell in general. And then Zendikar Resurgent is here because it is a permanent glimpse of nature that also doubles the mana production of our lands, but the piece of the puzzle that pushes it over the edge is the fact that it's 7 mana, so it triggers Raggadragga's third ability. We do want as many good 7 mana and up spells as we can get in order to trigger Raggadragga, and there's not too many of those. So whenever we can find one that has some other utility, we want to play that. And then we've got our big beatdown spells here. So again, we are a deck that is built around having a bunch of Mana Dorks going wide and pumping them up with Raggadragga. So Beastmaster Ascension and Craterhoof are going to be additional ways of playing into that. Craterhoof is also just a big creature that we can tutor out with like Natural Order and whatnot. And they both also, of course, pair well with all of the power-based mana rampers like Selvala, and can potentially be either just beatdown payoffs in themselves to immediately overrun the opponent, or combo with the power-based draw or mana ramping of the other cards that we have in the deck. Then aside from that, we've got a little bit of protection and stuff like Shepherd, Deflecting Swat, and Veil of Summer. Of course, again, all of our mana ramp. Various pieces of removal. We do need ways of getting rid of stuff that our opponent has, so stuff like Wild Magic Surge, Force of Vigor, Rexade, Beseiju, and of course Spine of Ish Sah can double up as just a way to destroy things if necessary. A little bit of stacks of our own, so Blood Moon is potentially viable in this deck. We can generate enough colors outside of green using, or outside of red using our Mana Dorks, although we do have to be careful with this because it does also shut down things like Gaia's Cradle. And then we've got some Null Rod effects in Collect Roof and Null Rod because we're not playing too many artifact rampers ourselves. Although again, do note that these will shut down certain combo pieces. So under a Null Rod, Staff of Domination and Umbral Mantle won't function, but all of our other combo pieces will still function. And then we've got a little bit of tutoring in Natural Order, GSZ, and Crop Rotation. So Raggadragga, again, lots of infinite combos, but also just a good beatdown strategy using all of our Mana Dorks, because most of our Mana Dorks become 3 power, aside from like birds, which is 2 power, but most of them become 3 power. And we can beat down our opponents there or just infinitely combo using various combos, some of which include Raggadragga's ability to give +7 and untap. And yep, that is pretty much going to be Raggadragga Goreguts boss.